Welcome to Transcendent Psychotherapist. In an age in which we can peer deeper into space than ever before, the James Webb Telescope, and see into vast, unimaginable scales of space, and we can also peer into the extremely small, beyond the kind of subatomic level, and we can do the physics beyond what we can even see. People are wondering about what reality is. What's it made up of? What is matter? Does matter even exist? Is it even real? But a lot of people, when I kind of do a video like this, probably watch it and think, what does it actually matter? Who cares? I'm just getting on with my life. I don't care what reality is made of. And I want to share in this video some reasons and a kind of framework for why I think idealism, which is the belief that reality is not fundamentally material in nature, but mental. It's made of consciousness. It's made of awareness. That's the kind of prime reality. Why that makes a difference to how we see ourselves, how we see the cosmos, how we see other people. It doesn't make a direct link sometimes, but it's a kind of a background filter through which we see the world, which I think changes things for us. So I'm going to show you a number of scientists and philosophers, some clips, and I'm going to kind of give you some commentary on that, and we're going to reflect on that together. I'm not necessarily going to agree with everything they say, but I think they offer some really good eye-openers. So we're going to start with Iain McGilchrist, who is he's a bit of a philosopher. He's written a massive book, well, two massive books, one called The Matter with Things, his most recent book, and another one called The Master and His Emissary. He's a psychiatrist who has really pioneered work on how the brain and the different parts and sides of the brain affect the way we see reality. But he's giving his take on what consciousness is and what matter is, if anything at all. So, Iain McGilchrist first.
Is through consciousness, and only through consciousness, that I have any concept of matter at all. Matter is, in fact, an abstraction that nobody has ever seen. What we are talking about when we refer to matter is all the things, the events, the processes in our experience that have certain qualities that show that they resist us. They manifest themselves by resisting our will. And I can be certain that I only know matter because of having consciousness. But I can't be certain that I only know consciousness because of having matter, a brain. That may be true, or it may not be true. In fact, I don't believe it is true, but that's a separate argument.
So, Iain McGilchrist there, giving us his take on matter and consciousness. The key thing I want you to take away from there is that we really only know reality in consciousness. Like all of our knowledge, all of our so-called experience of matter is experience. It happens in consciousness. So in this next clip, I'm going to show you the similar point being made by Rupert Spira, a kind of spiritual Advaita Vedanta teacher who I think is a really interesting thinker.
Before we dive into space-time being doomed, one last question, actually, Rupert, for you on this, which is something I hear you say a lot, which is that no one has ever found matter. Now, again, I think to someone who perhaps is not particularly, who is a bit uninitiated, that might sound like an outrageous claim. So can you just clarify what you mean by that?
Well, all we ever find are, or know, are conscious experiences. And we extrapolate that, the existence of a physical stuff called matter that exists independently of consciousness. But nobody has ever found that stuff, let alone found how consciousness is generated from it. We found what appears as matter. So when we look at reality through our perceiving and conceiving faculties, reality appears to us as matter. And so matter is the name we give to the way reality appears to a finite mind that is constructed in the way a human mind is constructed. And there may be other kinds of minds in reality, that there may be other minds that look at the same reality, because there's only one reality, and it may appear to them in a very different way, not as matter. Why? Because their minds are configured in a different way from a human mind. So matter, the physical universe, is just the way that the one reality, which I would suggest is made of consciousness, appears from the localized finite perspective of a human mind. So matter is part of the way reality appears. It's not what reality is. And it's fine. I'm not suggesting that we should get rid of, that we should no longer speak in terms of matter, or it's fine as long as we know that we're not describing what reality ultimately is. And actually, if we then try to find that stuff that appears to us as matter, if we go deeply into it, we never actually find it. Nobody has ever actually found it. We find appearances in consciousness.
Yes. Okay, so for example, if I hold this pen up, it seems like there's a pen here, but actually you can't separate the pen from the awareness that knows it.
You can't separate the pen from the awareness that knows it, nor can you separate its appearance from the perceiving faculties through which it is known. It's not a coincidence that as human beings, our perceiving faculties consist of seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. And surprise, surprise, the world appears to us as sights, sounds, tastes, textures, and smells. Do you think that's a coincidence? Of course not. If we had a sixth perceiving sense, let's call it Xing, then we would find X's in the world.
Okay, I don't think I need to give a great deal of commentary on that. Fairly self-evident what he's saying. I think he explained it brilliantly. But basically, McGilchrist saying the reality that we know, we only know through consciousness. Whether or not matter is really there or not, the only thing we can be certain of is we have experiences. And then Spira is building on that and saying, well, all you ever have are the experiences. That we can then say, the step to infer that there's actually physical matter is a bit of a leap. We never actually encounter matter. We just experiences of what we call the physical, hardness, solidness, but these are all qualities. Okay. So next thing I want to look at is to share a similar insight from way back in history, from philosophy, from a philosopher, a Neoplatonist called Plotinus. This is way before the age of modern science, but just really, in a sense, using logic to show that matter can't really be ultimately real. I'll let him explain, and then we'll comment after.
Is there a further matter of which visible and tangible matter in all its variety is ultimately composed, a more or a most primitive feature of the world's makeup? The favoured ancient answer to that question had been affirmative, to wit, a set of 4 elements comprising earth, air, fire, and water. End of story? Well, no. Earth, air, fire, and water were generally understood to be qualitative terms, each of them referring not to a single homogeneous stuff, water in the sense of H2O, for instance, but to the following set of primary qualities or combinations of qualities: hot, cold, moist, and dry, all of which admit of change and degree. Qualities of what, we may ask, to continue the analysis? The favoured answer, the Aristotelian answer, had been matter. Plotinus's problem and its nominal affinity to modern physics can now be stated. In order to serve as the physical foundation of everything, ultimate matter can't be identified with definite or determinate things, such as the 4 elements, For in that case, it couldn't serve as their foundation too. Matter as such, or matter simpliciter, to use Aristotelian language, must always be potential and analogical rather than actual, drawing its descriptive identity from that of which it is the matter. For instance, the bronze of the spear, the wood of the bed. But bronze and wood, or even the four elements of which things like bronze and wood were supposed to consist, aren't ultimate matter, because they have definite form, wooden, brazen, and so on. Is there then any such entity as ultimate matter, if that expression signifies a completely indefinite and indeterminate foundation for things? How can we know that such matter is in any sense real, and not a mere figment or convenience of our conceptual scheme? I want to show how and why Plotinus grapples with these deep issues. He's not willing to say outright that ultimate matter is nothing. Ultimate matter, in his view, is a precondition for the existence of bodies, three-dimensionally extended and perceptible objects. But taken by itself, ultimate matter, according to Plotinus, isn't bodily or physical stuff or anything with determinate quality or quantity. Ultimate matter is completely imperceptible and non-actual, taken by itself.
So, interestingly, I think what he's really getting at in layman's terms is to say, well, the kind of questions you might ask as a child is like, well, what's my Lego toy made of? Oh, it's made of Lego bricks. Okay, what are the Lego bricks made of? Well, they're made of whatever chemical you want to say, the plastic. Okay, well, what are those molecules made of? Well, they're made of atoms. Okay, what atoms made of? Well, the atoms are made of like subatomic particles with masses of space between them, and then the next question follows. Well, what are subatomic particles? Oh, well, they're made up of like quarks and gluons, and well, what are they made of? And you go on and on and on. One of the things really interesting is that the modern era has been really trying to explain everything by a series of reductions. We're trying to kind of say, well, we'll reach a kind of base level of bits out of which the whole is constructed. Okay, the problem is it leaves you with what philosophy would call infinite regress, because you're constantly going, well, what's that made of? What's that made of? You can't see an end to it. What he talks about there, Anthony Long, as ultimate matter, what Plotinus is talking about as ultimate matter, that there will just be stuff that is just no longer further divisible. And this problem was happening in philosophy in the pre-Socratics, even people like Democritus and people around there. In principle, how can you have atom means indivisible, except we then discovered that you could split the atom. How could you reach a basic non-reducible building block for material reality? So what they're really saying is, well, actually, it is, well, the further down you go, there's really kind of nothing there. We've seen that in physics. It kind of disappears beyond anything actually tangible and physical into something indeterminate. But this is something we probably should have known long before the discoveries of modern physics. It's a kind of rational, logical discovery that people like Plotinus were kind of suggesting. Okay, so hopefully what I've done is maybe make a bit of a dent in the idea, in our kind of intuition that we have, that, well, matter is just kind of like really obvious, it's really solid stuff. It's, of course that's what reality is made of. When you dig down into it, what's actually there? And that we can look at that in philosophical terms, but also in science terms. So yeah, there's nothing really solid there. So what is reality made up of? the idealist would come in and say, actually, the ultimate nature of reality is back to what McGilchrist and what Spira and that was saying, is it's a mental experience. It all happens in experience. It's a phenomenon in consciousness. Consciousness is the bedrock of reality, in which everything occurs and through which we know everything that occurs. Okay, so hopefully we've kind of set somewhat of the, reason why idealism is worth thinking through and taking seriously. Now what I want to do is for us to think about the kind of difference it makes. And one of the things that I think should say is that the physical world offers us the so-called physical world, if you like, offers us a very limited picture. But underneath that perception, the appearance of things, is a still richer mental field full of meaning, because the world is part of a subjective mind. So I'm going to switch now to philosopher Bernardo Kastrup, who is behind quite a resurgence in philosophy of what's called analytic idealism.
And what do you think are the implications of idealism playing more of a fundamental role in culture, and what would it bring us? Like we know what a materialist driven world looks like because we live in it, and it's pretty much all we know. Like you said before, we've inherited that kind of DNA. What would be your hope for a world that starts to move more towards an idealist perspective?
If idealism is really understood and internalized, such that people look upon the world through those new lenses, it will literally change everything. Let me try to give you a sense of why. For an analytic idealist such as me, what we call the physical world is merely the result of measurement or observation. Now, let me try to explain this with a metaphor. Evolution has not given us a transparent window into the world. That wouldn't work. We wouldn't survive if that were the case. And there are very, very rigorous technical arguments about this. I can point people to those. But trust me, if we had a transparent window to see the world as it really is, we would literally die. We would dissolve into an entropic soup. We would be too confused to compete in our ecosystem. So what evolution has given us was a dashboard of dials. So imagine that you're inside an airplane and you have all those dials in the instrument panel in front of you. You can fly safely by instruments alone. People do this every day. But they can also look across the transparent windscreen. Now, evolution did not give us the windscreen. All it has given us is the dials. What shows up in the dials is what we call the physical world. The dials are the screen of perception. So everything you see around you right now is not the world as it really is. It is how it's being measured through your dashboard of dials, through your instrument panel. You are surrounded by an instrument panel. That's what evolution has given you. Nothing else would work to help us survive. So if you understand the world this way, then you realize that the physical world is not the end of the story. It is not its own meaning. It's just like the dashboard. Reality is right behind it. You can't see it directly. You can only make inferences about it based on the dashboard. But there is a whole world out there outside that aircraft that you cannot see directly. So if you're reading low air pressure, high air humidity, high wind speed on the dashboard, maybe there is a beautiful storm outside, lightning, all kinds of rain, all kinds of beautiful patterns, amazing stuff. And it's right on the other side of the dashboard, but you cannot see it directly. As an idealist, this is how I relate to the world. The world as it really is not physicality. Physicality is my dashboard. So I'm always intuiting that extra dimension of depth, mystery, and meaning that is right under my nose, right behind my dashboard.
Okay, yeah. So basically making the point that, yeah, there's more to reality. Of course, Bernardo might, I don't know, is interesting. How does he know we can actually access that reality? Does that change whether it's actually useful to know it if we only operate in kind of this world? Or is it the case, which I think he might be suggesting, that the richer tapestry, if you like, behind the way we see the world, means that this world, it has greater meaning, greater kind of significance and potential. It's about more than first meets the eye. Okay, so we've talked there about, we've built on the kind of idea that matter isn't fundamental, and now we've talked about actually the physical world, and stopping at the physical world kind of gives us a bit of a closed picture on reality. I want to now come back to Iain McGilchrist, because Iain McGilchrist makes the point often about what we call reductionism, this idea of just reducing the world to nothing but physics, nothing but bits and bobs and atoms. And the point I'm going to make here is that materialism, which is the kind of opposite of idealism, has left us with a very sterile view of the cosmos, and therefore of ourselves and nature, and of reality, of the environment, etc., etc. Because the old kind of materialist paradigm, often operating in a kind of Newtonian physics, which is, you know, still true at a certain level, but it doesn't give us the whole picture, that shows us a world that is just like a kind of wind-up mechanical clock. Okay, it's a dead cosmos, and then life kind of emerges sort of out of that. Whereas if you go back further in history, people like the Greeks, when they used the word cosmos with a capital K, it's a Greek word, thought of the cosmos as pretty much a living thing. But let's, you know, and they didn't start from little dead bits building it up into a clockwork machine. They saw it as a living whole. And McGilchrist, the psychiatrist we met earlier on, is going to explain how that's important, how we need to recover this sense of seeing reality as a joined up whole, and the kind of meaning that brings back online. And I would make the point, which he doesn't make here, is that under idealism, with the whole of reality as a kind of sitting within consciousness, a field of consciousness, universal mind, if you like, you have that framework. Everything is part of a living whole. Iain McGilchrist, here he comes.
Take 3 examples of what I mean about how damaging this way of thinking can be. And the first one is really just to demonstrate how absurd it is. In my life, and maybe in yours, one of the most meaningful things of all is music. Now, if you take music apart, you get phrases, and then finally you get notes. And then you go, oh, at last, I've put it into my cloud chamber, and I can definitively affirm that music is made of notes. Round of applause. Now, what is a note? Once we know what a note is, we can work out what music is. But of course, a note is, well, nothing really. It's just a meaningless sound. And if you put thousands and thousands and thousands of these together, you get Mozart's G minor quintet, which probably means more than anything that you can encounter in the world. How does that happen? It can't be in the notes. We've established that, because 1 note means nothing, 2 notes mean nothing, 3 notes mean nothing, and presumably, therefore, 35,000 notes mean nothing. So it must be in something else. Well, the only things that there are gaps. There's just silence, which is the gaps between the notes in the melody, the gaps between the notes in the harmony as they occur at the same time, and the ictus of the way in which the thing moves. But silence on its own doesn't mean anything either. So this is a perfect example of a gestalt. And to me, a much better image of the universe is a symphony or a dance or a beautiful piece of choral music rather than a machine. I don't just say that in some flowery poetic way. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with the insights of poetry, but I mean it in a very deep philosophical way that we misunderstand it. And of course, the other thing about music is that it simply cannot be understood except in an act of encounter. It's not there, and you can look at it and go away and inspect it. You have to encounter it. Now, that is a very good image of everything in our lives, everything in our experience, and I would say of the nature of the cosmos. The second thing that I would look at is something that will take me a little bit longer, but which is really very important to me, because after all, I'm a doctor. I worked in the area of neurology and psychiatry, and very prominent in the life sciences, as they're called, is the image of the machine. Now, physics, curiously, moved on from the image of a machine about 100 years ago. It decided that simply the cosmos is nothing like anything mechanical at all. However, this message hasn't got through to certain prominent public intellectuals in the realm of the biological sciences, who carry on in a perfect frock-coated mid-19th century way to see the whole business of the living world as mechanical. And we must stop conceiving of not only living beings as things, not as just as machines, but as things at all. They're processes.
Okay, a video worth watching in its entirety. So I think it's called Nothing Buttery, B-U-T-T-E-R-Y, this kind of idea he's attacking of reductionism, of saying, oh, well, it's just nothing but its constitutive parts. So really interesting point he makes there, you know, the analogy of looking at something like music. Music cannot be understood in terms of physical bits and bobs, or even just simply by its parts. You have to start with the whole for there to be any sense of meaning, or for it to mean anything, for it to be about anything, for its beauty to cohere. So there are things which we all value and love and are in touch with that just do not fit into this materialist kind of pixelated understanding of reality, where we can divide it up into atomic bits. We have to think of a whole. And something like music, you know, is fully qualitative. It's not just bits of quantity. And so that, I would suggest, fits better under an idealist framework, something that happens in the experiencing, qualitative experiencing mind, that music fits naturally, in a sense, into a universe and into a reality that is not material, that is about an experiencing subject. Okay, so next thing I really want to bring online in our thinking is that idealism really extends the possibility of values, okay, and meaning to the whole consciousness, building on what we just said there around music, because it is primarily a mental thing. You cannot have meaning without mind. So what we're going to look at is a clip. This may be slightly more controversial. Stay with it. You don't have to agree with him entirely. He brings in the idea of God here, but that may not be something people are comfortable, certainly not with that language. But whether or not we call the ultimate God or the ultimate or source or what have you, maybe that's more palatable for a lot of people. But Keith Ward, who we're going to listen to in a moment, is emeritus professor of philosophy. He's a fellow of the Royal Society, so distinguished philosopher, and he is an idealist. He's also a Christian idealist, but here he is giving a lecture speaking about idealism and really saying why he thinks idealism makes more sense of things like meaning and goodness. I'll let him speak. Let's go to Keith Ward.
Those things would not exist without mind. And I think that is true. They would not. So if you say what would exist without mind, we don't know, but it's something very weird. Perhaps it's beyond our imagination. Martin Rees, who was the astronomer royal, has said recently, we'll never understand it. Reality is such that the human mind just can't understand it. Well, if that's true, at least materialism can't be true, because materialists claim to understand reality and say it's got to be like this. However, most philosophers, and I think of Immanuel Kant when I say most philosophers, right? Immanuel Kant, who's still a standard set text in all British universities the world over, probably, said, well, reality is mind-like. He called it noumenal. You remember he distinguished phenomenal reality, how things appear, from noumenal reality, from the Greek nous, which means mind. It's mind-like reality. And if you remember that, you see Kant was an idealist. He was somebody who thought without mind, there can't be a material world. Now, we now know, I would submit, in our case, that there wouldn't be a world like the one we see without our minds. The idealist expands this and says, well, there wouldn't be a reality at all without mind. Now, I think that helps to explain how values can really exist. So let me devote just a few minutes to saying how it helps. In my last talk, I said, well, values are, in morality, you have a sense of obligation. Here's something which I feel I ought to do. It's objective. I don't make it up. It impresses itself upon me. And that's something that appears to be part of objective reality, but it's not physical. How could it exist at all? Laws of nature are the same, as I've said. How can they exist without a material universe at all? And similarly in art, experience of beauty, of what is communicated through art and through the beauties of nature, if that's objective, doesn't depend wholly upon me, how can beauty exist? Well, if you think, as an idealist, of a cosmic mind which makes reality real, because reality becomes a way of expressing the nature of mind. Mind needs to be expressed. You're not thinking of a mind which just exists on its own without being expressed. Just as our bodies express our characters, so the universe expresses the mind of God, this cosmic mentality. And if you think of it like that, then you can say, well, a value, let's start with the human case. Something you value, something you think is valuable, is your thought of a state which may or may not exist, but which would be good if it did exist. So a value is most easily conceived of as a thought of something that it would be good if it existed. That's a very mental property. It's not a physical property. Philosophers call it intentionality. Intentionality is the property of a thought, something that exists in a human mind, which is a thought of the future or of something which may or may not exist. That's the intention of the thought is about something. Intentionality is aboutness. Thoughts are about things. Berkeley again said this. I mean, he said thoughts are things that exist in human minds. They do exist, but they don't just exist as present realities, like a glass of water. I mean, so that's a glass of water. That exists. That's what it is. But it's not about anything. If you say, what's that glass of water about? It's not about anything. If it was a work of art, however, if this was a work of art, it probably is somewhere, then you might say, what's it about? What's the meaning of it? What's the point of it? Why do that? I always feel that when well, no, I won't say that. My son's an artist, and he does things which mean something. And I'm sure they're wonderful. Yes, they are. Very wonderful. Sometimes you say, I can't see the meaning, what's it about? So art is about something. That sense of aboutness is a mental property. It's only minds which can be about anything, or they can make things which are about something, like thoughts. I'm just producing, electromagnetic vibrations, right? But actually they're about something. Well, I think they are anyway. So that's intentionality. So a value you can conceive intelligibly as the thought of a mind. And if there is a cosmic mind, the mind of God, then the thoughts in the mind of God can be those things which appear to us as values: beauty, truth, goodness.
Okay, so really, obviously, it's coming from a more theistic idealist point of view there. I did a video the other day on personal idealism. So this differs, for those of you that are big Bernardo Kastrup fans, from his type of idealism, which sees the cosmic mind as kind of, it doesn't really think things through in a self-aware what's called a metacognitive or metaconscious way. But that's an interesting point here because, well, is there room? Well, I certainly think there's room on various types of idealism that Keith Ward points out here, where the whole of reality could be, in some senses, part of an intended mind, or not an intended mind, a mind with intention. So if that were the case, there is, everything about life, everything that we come across in life sits within an intended frame, which is, it expresses the values of the mind that is behind it. Now, I won't go into that in any more depth because there's all sorts of different views people might have about the values and the intentions, and what kind of intentions might lie in a cosmic mind, and that would depend on your philosophical, religious views, maybe, if you have any, what those might look like. But obviously, if you have a cosmic mind, there can be intentionality or aboutness to it. Now, I would argue, and I had an interesting debate with some Facebook friends in the Bernardo Kastrup fan club last couple of days about, if a mind, does a mind have to be deliberative and kind of meta-conscious, as Kastrup would put it, in order to have values? And I am not convinced that's true. Depends what you mean by values, right? So I think values can be understood in two ways. Right, we can have the kind of values, a mind can have a kind of values that are kind of thought through. What matters to me? What do I want to do? Okay, that's deliberative. It's meta-conscious. I'm aware of my thinking about it. But I would suggest actually that even doing that, and to be able to do that, and when we do that, what we do is we kind of search ourselves and see what we already value at an unconscious level or a non-meta-conscious level. So, in other words, what I'm saying is the conscious field, or the broader conscious mind that might exist, already must have values in it for a mind to be able to introspect and think about what it wants. Now, Kastrup, Schopenhauer, and so on, Kastrup and the idealists from the past, like Schopenhauer and Fichte and so on, saw absolute mind as kind of willing, having pure will. Kastrup sees mind at large as desiring and willing, but there has to be some sort of aboutness. It might not be metacognitive or meta-conscious at that level, but there has to be values within it in order for there to be any desiring. Desiring has an aboutness to it, even if it's not a cognitive aboutness. It has a kind of wishing and desiring. There's something in mind being felt and being pushed towards that's wanted. That's what we mean by values. It's what we want. Okay, that was a little bit of a kind of private debate that was going on there. But I think idealism of all types brings us back to sitting in a framework, whether you conceive of that in a more kind of theist view or a somewhat different view like Kastrup's. It brings us into a framework where values are shot through the entirety of reality. And McGilchrist makes the same point in his book, The Matter with Things. Values are not things that we just make up. They're things we discover. That reality has built into it, that it is part of the nature of reality. The values exist, that when we say something is beautiful, it's not just subjectively that we particularly find it beautiful, that there is a beauty to it. Now, on a materialist, physicalist view, you can't really say that. It's just a concocted story. But under idealism, there's the possibility that you're discovering, as a small part of the broader mind, something that is true to the greater subjectivity, the greater mind, of which we and everything are a part. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is no clip for this one. This is just my thinking. It builds a little bit off the video I did the other day on Mary Whitton Calkins, who was a philosopher back in died in 1930. First female philosopher, president of the American Philosophical Association and the American Psychological Association. But I would say that under idealism, the world is also more intelligible. Okay. I'm literally going to read here from a bit of a script that I wrote to try to explain this, because I don't want to get this wrong. So, as we said at the start, you are an experiencer, and all you know are experiences, perceptions, intentions, memory, ideas, desires, feelings, thoughts. Is there anything you know that's outside of this experiencing? I would say not. In theory, is there anything you experience that couldn't be a simulation? No, not with enough technology. Or a dream? Now, I don't think so. If there's a world beyond just your experience of the world, not just you dreaming up a world, then how is it you as a conscious experiencer can experience things? How do they connect with your consciousness? If there really are entirely non-mental material objects out there, how do they communicate themselves to non-material consciousness? See, there's a problem. How is there an interaction between things that are of a radical different category? If we're saying there's a material world out there, how does it connect to you as a mental experiencer? Unless matter, whatever that is in some way fundamentally mental, part of consciousness, these are things with entirely different properties that cannot connect to mind. It would be like having two entirely incompatible languages trying to communicate, or someone that can only see red trying to explain red to someone who can only see green. If we are conscious, and that I would suggest is an indubitable fact, we can't doubt that. We're conscious. To deny consciousness, you'd have to be conscious to start with. If we know that we're conscious and we know a world of things out there, then the world also must be mental in nature. So what I'm saying in a nutshell here is that you know you're a conscious experiencing mental subject. You are able to apprehend the world and make it sort of intelligible to you. It presents itself to you in some way. It communicates with you, even if you don't see it exactly as it really is in itself out there. Something from out there communicates with you, and that means that the world must also be mental. In other words, idealism makes the world more intelligible. Now, that's not going to matter to most people on a day-to-day level, but it's just an interesting little side thing I would chuck in there. Something I think you can't do on materialism. Finally, last point I want to make is that if consciousness is all, that everything is a field of consciousness under the way we see things in idealism, nothing is ever lost. Our deaths are not the end. It may or may not be the end of ourselves as we currently are, but our finite, in our finite consciousnesses, but because our finite consciousness, just me, as particularly me, would only be one part of the broader consciousness, that means that this consciousness which came from that will return to that, and it will probably, I would imagine, yield up all the mental memories, perceptions, experiences and so on that it's learned and taken in its lifetime into that broader field. Interestingly, that's pretty much what a lot of near-death experiences report, something along those lines. The idea of the life review, everything flashing back through your mind on death. This suggests that everything in our life matters. Now, I'm not going to speculate again, back to Keith Ward's thing, but I'm not going to speculate again on what consciousness is about for the purposes of this video. I've got my own opinions, of course, what its intentions are, but we can be sure everything we experience must be part of the whole picture. And that leaves room for many interpretations, but I think meaning runs through everything. And that's really radically different. If you listen to like Viveki, John Viveki, and people like that, they are talking about the kind of meaning crisis that we're facing in the West, you know, with the secularization of society, the way religions have kind of declined quite a lot in our cultures. There's a vacuum of meaning. And it can be really easy to fall into a kind of nihilism. And idealism provides a way out of that. And I think that also can affect people's mental health. Because if you're living against a constant, you know, especially if you're a bit of a thinking person, you're more prone sometimes to depression and to low mood. And that's going to be much more likely if you see the world as fundamentally meaningless. It's not about anything. Whereas under idealism, I would say that reopens that door to the re-enchantment of the world, that it can be about something. So I'm going to just finally conclude by pulling this all together. What I've put to you today is not proof of idealism. I'm not offering it in that spirit, but some strong suggestive reasons for favouring it. And I hope I've shown also that under idealism, we have grounds to see ourselves as minds inhabiting a inhabiting a cosmos in which we are at home, a living cosmos whose contents are rooted in an overarching consciousness, an overarching mind, which lends value and meaning to all its contents. And that changes the way we see ourselves, the way we see others, the way we see the earth and the environment. Without getting too specific on values, we can say that we are part of something cosmic and ultimate. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe, press that subscribe button, and press like. And I'd really love to hear a comment from you about what you made of today. I hope it was helpful. Thank you. Bye.